Hello, hello. London calling. Welcome to this day 4 of the TooFatLardies Advent Calendar for 2022. I nearly forgot what year we were in then. And the pendulum has swung back to me to talk to you about something that's behind door number 4. So let's see what we've got behind door number 4. First of all, I'll open the tab, undo the seal, and it says, "Good morning, Nick. For this entry in the Oddcast Advent Calendar, we'd like you to talk about the size of armies and the size of games that you now play, and how your armies and forces that you use in your war games have changed in size over the years, and why." Gosh, okay, well, let's have a think about that. I mean, if I throw my mind back to the very beginning, vast armies of plastic figures sprawled across the carpet as the latest huge battle in the Napoleonic Wars is fought out on the bedroom floor. I guess we've come a long way since then. You know, my first reflection on that is armies and sizes of units is, why didn't Airfix give us platoon-sized units in those boxes? I guess you could argue that some of them were for the Second World War troops. But it would have been really lovely if they'd actually given us properly constituted platoons that we could have put on the table. How much would that have told us about the warfare and the fighting that was carried out? But it wasn't to be. So how things changed over time, I don't know. Units is a thing, isn't it? I've always liked to collect units. I've always liked to, I guess, some way personalise the toys that I've got under my command, he says, in inverted commas. I like to know what units they represent. They're not just British infantry or French infantry. I've always given them a label of some kind, and I think that probably hasn't changed. You know, when I buy figures now, I might paint them fairly generically so they can represent multiple things, but whenever they go on the tabletop, they are definitely cast in a role, and that role will be an historic unit of some kind, probably with named leaders, just anything to try and make the game a bit more specific. But I've always liked to collect units, and whole units. What I mean, even though I know I'll only put 1 or 2 of them on the table, there's something nice I like about being able to look at the units that I've got, the figures that I've got, the vehicles that I have, and to be able to parade them, for want of a better word, in units and see what that unit looks like. What I mean by that is, for instance, I have a full troop of British Paratrooper Airborne Recce, even though I know I'll probably never put the full troop on the table. I have full troops of tanks, again, even though I know I'll never put the full troop on the table. I like to have a full troop or a full squadron, full platoons, or even companies of infantry, just knowing that I can field them if I need to. Does that sound a bit weird? Maybe it does. But, I like to have the full unit, not just 1 or 2 of each type. So I've consequently, of course, grown my collection considerably, whereas some people might just have 1 or 2 of each vehicle. I've got probably 4, 5, 7, 8 or 9 even, which is more than I would ever need and takes up lots and lots of space. And of course, I guess that shines light on one of the ways that my size of armies and games have changed over the years is, as I look at it now, I think the biggest challenge with growing a period, starting a period and playing games, is knowing when to stop. When do you stop growing your collection to enable you to play a game? That requires a bit of discipline that I've lacked over the years. It requires the ability to ignore all the lovely eye candy that we increasingly see and we're exposed to on social media and magazines and all the lovely things that glitter that we turn our eyes to. And now, of course, with 3D printing, the world, as we've said many times, is our oyster. If I see it, I can potentially get it. The only barrier being budget which is a real barrier and becoming an even bigger barrier as we go into it. Certainly in the UK, the cost of living crisis that we're in at the moment, balancing wargaming against everything else is going to be a challenge for many of us. But knowing when to stop and knowing when to, when have we got no more storage space? This is a real challenge for me, and I'm sure it's the same for many in the hobby. I've got enough, more than enough figures that I would ever need to play a game, but the armies just keep growing. The appeal of the new, a bit of retail therapy, just some form of megalomania. I don't really know what it is. Armies just keep getting bigger and bigger. So some discipline is going to need to be required. Not my forte. Very ill-disciplined in general. So how am I going to do that? It's going to be really tricky. Well, over the years, of course, with increasing difficulty this creates for storage, and I do find that is now affecting my wargaming choices. So bigger games are a huge consideration for me. I need to think about what I go for in terms of growing new armies or taking on new areas of wargaming. I'm much more likely to spend time, money to expand an existing army or period than to go into a new one. This means that existing troops and terrain can be used, I guess, for the new period, so I can use my existing things. What this means is that terrain becomes a connector, so the region that I'm representing might then be used for different periods. So, for instance, if I'm using things for my Mexicans, in and around Texas, I might also be able to use some of those things for What a Cowboy, or I will think about how they could be generic items that might translate into other periods. So I'm particularly excited when I see things that can be used in multiple locations, especially terrain pieces, which I do have a real soft spot for. Especially on eBay, I'm a bit of a sucker for nice terrain pieces. So I like things that can be used in multiple locations. So generic is good because generic layouts can be made specific by adding just one or two items that quintessentially identify the location. And this, of course, means it's easier for the viewer, for the onlooker, for the player to become immersed in the game. Because if you get the buildings and terrain to look right, then you can get away with the fact that some of the figures may be not quite dressed for that campaign. It makes it more plausible, and you can get away with a few things, if your armies aren't necessarily wearing the right footwear or should be wearing greatcoats and perhaps aren't. You can get away with it if the terrain supports you in that. So you can expand the games you play and yet still use the same core forces. So I'm finding that as a real feature for me at the moment, especially as I look to expand my collections or decide whether or not I even want to expand my collections. What does it mean for me for the future? I'm being quite selfish in this reflection, but I suspect my internal dialogue is one that many of us will recognise. Well, it probably means that I'm going to go into smaller scales, not larger ones. I think lots of my stuff is in 28mm, but I suspect that if I do new periods, something that's brand new to me, I'll be looking to do that in probably a smaller scale, simply because of storage. This year, of course, we saw the release of Strength and Honour. So Strength and Honour, of course, being the ancient warfare rules from the pen of Maestro Mark Backhouse. Quite literally, an entire army that can fit inside a lunchbox. So the appeal for something like this is huge, I think, especially when you consider that, army blocks are also now available from commercial suppliers. So I could launch into a new period like that really easily. And of course, small scales, exist across periods. So I still have an itch to scratch about the ACW. Whether I'll ever go into a smaller scale for that, I really don't know, but I'd like to. So I'd like to think this is something that signals an increased interest in small scale games. I see more people playing small scale games, and I'm very interested to see where that takes us. I think it also means for me the fact that I'm having these storage issues, and other factors around wanting to vary the way that I game, also means that I'm looking outside of figure games completely. Map-based Kriegspiels, of course, can offer me to field entire armies in vast campaigns. And I'd love to be hosting and playing more of these over the coming years. But I'm also looking to other tabletop games or board games that can challenge my command decision making and that don't add to the footprint of storage boxes in my garage. And with that in mind, I wonder if there are some that I could add to my Christmas list. Let me think.